On July 13, 2026, 4 distinct datasets were published by international and state agencies. To a casual observer, they are isolated news events. To an administrator, they form the exact parameters of the UPSC syllabus across General Studies Papers 1, 2, and 3. First, the International Monetary Fund updated its World Economic Outlook, establishing India's macroeconomic trajectory against a backdrop of geopolitical choke points. Second, Kerala's crude birth rate dropped below 10 for the first time, exposing the fiscal realities of an aging population. Third, the CITES Animals Committee convened in Geneva, tightening the regulatory framework over global marine biodiversity and international trade. Finally, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration issued a high-probability forecast for a very strong El Niño, directly threatening the Indian monsoon. The core challenge of governance is translating these isolated data points into interconnected policy frameworks. We will dissect the mechanics of each. The IMF's July 2026 World Economic Outlook update projects India's economy to grow at 6.4% for the 2026-27 fiscal year. This dual timeline graphic illustrates a common statistical trap. The IMF projects 6.4% growth for the Indian fiscal year, running April to March. Simultaneously, it projects 7.0% growth for the 2026 calendar year, running January to December. These figures are not contradictory. They measure overlapping but distinctly shifted base data periods. India's growth moderation is tied mechanically to global energy supply disruptions. When vessels navigating the Middle East face conflict risks, the economic impact transmits directly to domestic markets. This flowchart tracks the transmission mechanism. A conflict bottleneck in the Strait of Hormuz constricts global oil transit, immediately inflating Brent crude prices and driving up India's import bill. Paying more for the same volume of imported oil automatically widens India's current account deficit. As more capital flows out to pay for expensive oil, the rupee depreciates against the dollar. A weaker rupee ensures that subsequent imports cost more, generating imported inflation across the entire domestic economy. This forces the Reserve Bank of India into a strict monetary policy dilemma. Raising the repo rate helps defend the currency and suppress inflation, but it increases the cost of borrowing and suppresses domestic investment. Simultaneously, the central government faces a fiscal dilemma. Expanding fuel and fertilizer subsidies protects households from price shocks, but risks violating fiscal deficit consolidation targets. Domestic macroeconomic growth is inextricably bound to international geopolitical choke points. Moving to demography, the Kerala Directorate of Economics and Statistics has released the annual Vital Statistics Report for 2024. This line graph tracks a severe demographic contraction. Kerala's crude birth rate has plunged from 17.67 in 1992 down to 9.64 in 2024. The state's total fertility rate now hovers around 1.19. The terminology here is specific. Crude birth rate measures the number of live births per 1,000 people. Total fertility rate calculates the average number of children born to a woman over her reproductive years. Reaching the replacement fertility rate of 2.1 does not halt population growth immediately. Due to population momentum, previous large generations continue to enter their reproductive years, keeping the absolute population growing even as the fertility rate declines. This layout plots the sharp intrastate divergence. Aging is not uniform. The Northern District of Malappuram maintains a crude birth rate of 15.16, while the Southern District of Alappuzha has collapsed to 5.28. This demographic pyramid models the exact structural transition underway. A youth-heavy society with a wide base is rapidly morphing into a top-heavy, aging population. Managing this top-heavy structure demands a massive fiscal shift. State capital must be reallocated away from primary schools and directed toward the silver economy, funding geriatric medicine, pensions, and palliative care. The labor market must also adjust. A shrinking local workforce forces agricultural and construction sectors to rely heavily on inward migration from other states, alongside a rapid increase in advanced farm mechanization. Furthermore, an aging population strains the care economy. Without extensive state-backed elderly care, the physical burden of nursing-dependent seniors falls primarily on women, operating as unpaid labor and further depressing female labor force participation. Kerala represents the frontier of India's demographic transition. The high dependency ratios emerging here model the exact fiscal pressures the rest of the nation will eventually face. In July 2026, the 34th CITES Animals Committee convened in Geneva to evaluate the international trade protocols for heavily exploited taxa. This table contrasts two distinct international frameworks. CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, strictly regulates the cross-border movement of specimens. The IUCN Red List evaluates scientific extinction risk. They are entirely separate entities. Under CITES, Appendix 1 generally prohibits commercial international trade of wild-sourced specimens. Appendix 2 permits trade, but subjects it to strict regulatory oversight. This flowchart maps the legal export of an Appendix 2 specimen. The absolute prerequisite for this process is the non-detriment finding. The National Scientific Authority must conduct an assessment to prove harvesting won't trigger a population decline. Only then can the Management Authority verify legal origin and issue the physical export permit. Regulating diverse marine taxa, such as sharks, rays, and reef-building corals, presents severe ongoing traceability and enforcement challenges. High seas bycatch and highly processed derivatives, like dried shark fins, routinely bypass standard customs identification. Identifying these specimens often requires DNA barcoding and advanced digital traceability. There is an inherent livelihood tension here. Enforcing strict trade controls without providing alternative economic pathways effectively criminalizes coastal fishing communities. Effective global biodiversity governance requires balancing rigid scientific extinction thresholds with socioeconomic justice for producer nations. This NOAA global temperature map indicates a 63% probability of a very strong El Niño developing between November 2026 and January 2027. ENSO is a coupled ocean-atmosphere phenomenon. El Niño defines the oceanic component, the sea surface temperature anomaly in the equatorial Pacific. The Southern Oscillation defines the atmospheric component, the shifts in sea level pressure. This diagram shows the normal Walker circulation. Persistent trade winds push warm surface water west toward Indonesia, which drives cold, nutrient-rich upwelling in the east near Peru. During El Niño, those trade winds weaken. The warm water mass sloshes back across the central and eastern Pacific, completely reorganizing global atmospheric convection. While this reorganization generally suppresses the Indian southwest monsoon, the Indian Ocean Dipole operates independently and can alter the final rainfall baseline. A weakened southwest monsoon poses an immediate physical threat to Indian agriculture. This flow cascade traces the economic impact. A meteorological deficit rapidly becomes a hydrological drought. This prevents reservoir recharge, devastates kharif crop yields, and triggers severe food inflation. Furthermore, prolonged thermal stress from El Niño drives severe marine heat waves, causing mass coral bleaching and disrupting the coastal fisheries governed under CITES protocols. El Niño operates as the ultimate macro variable. It dictates the baseline of domestic food security, which subsequently drives the nation's core inflation metrics. These four events form one interlocking system. NOAA anomalies exacerbate IMF inflation constraints, while state demographics and global resource protocols redefine India's fiscal baselines. Mastering prelims requires isolating data and respecting technical definitions. Mastering mains requires synthesizing these cascading impacts to formulate actionable policy.